getting ready for the midterm.
No, it's not the getting ready for the midterm.
So put it on top of English 2.
Yes, that's what I would do. It's the best idea, probably. Okay, guys, so what we are going to start with today is going to be immensely helpful no matter what course you're taking. The information that we go over, we're going to be using quite a bit. You will also have a test on this. So I want you guys to pay really close attention. The sheet that Josh passed out for me has two sides to it. We're going to start by going over the first side and practicing with the first side. And then we'll go over the back side and practice with the back side. We're going to be practicing more with the front side today than the back side, and more with the back side tomorrow. So we're going to use this tomorrow a lot more as well. Feel free to write on this. When I say things and I kind of repeat it and I say, hey, and I give you this look that I have on my face right now, that usually means that you need to write it down. I don't usually say things just because I want to talk, even though I do. So it's really important that you guys make sure that you're taking notes on this. We're going to talk a little bit today about note-taking. Actually, we're going to talk a lot today about note-taking. I'm going to teach you guys some strategies that will hopefully help you guys understand and identify the main idea of a passage. How many of you thought the diagnostic was hard? Okay. How many of you felt unprepared for it? Okay. So the rest of you guys thought, oh, it was okay? It was easy? Anybody think it was easy? A couple of you? Okay.
Okay, show off back there.
Kyle knows expectations too, doesn't he?
I got to pick on him a little bit.
So it's important that I use this information and you guys kind of take with what you get today. Even if you are ready for English 4, what we're going over right now, what we're going to go over later today, and what we go over tomorrow will help you no matter what. It's stuff that you definitely need in order to be more successful. So it's also stuff that when we get into English 4, when you guys get into English 4, you're going to find that it's helpful for you. And the teachers in English 4, they're going to have this expectation that you guys already have it. So the students who are in English 4 are expected to already know this stuff and do this stuff. And then they do it on a more sophisticated level. So what I'm going to teach you is the basic, most simple form of it. And then as we go through the course, you'll be practicing with it. And then when you get into English 4 and then on into English 5, you'll be doing this stuff yourself and you will be using more sophisticated skills with it. So when we talk about active reading strategies, and this is at the very top there, and you can't see it up here because it's in the abyss. Active reading is a process. So when you think about things, they don't just happen. You have to make them happen. So it's the same thing with reading. In order for you to understand what you're reading even more and more deeply, you have to actively read. So you have to participate in it. You can't just start at the first word, end at the last word. That's the biggest mistake students make. That's okay when you're reading a novel that you want to read, or you're reading a newspaper article that you're interested in. But that's not okay for academic reading. So academic reading is anything that you're doing in the schools. So how many of you don't like, and you can be honest, don't like reading? A few of you? Okay. How many of you don't like science?
Science?
Yeah. Okay. How many of you don't enjoy history or social studies? Okay. When you get into the courses where you are struggling to understand the material, these are the strategies that you absolutely need to go to. When you are taking a test, these are strategies that are going to be more helpful for you to understand the material. And then when you get to those questions, you already know the answers. Those answers are not as difficult. So there are things that we do before we actually start reading. There are things that we do when we're reading. And then there are things that we do after we're done reading in order to be active readers. So we're going to talk about each of these piece by piece. And we're going to practice with it as we go through. So in order to practice with it, we are going to be reading a little bit about the human journey. So we're going to talk about this piece by piece. You will be required to write on this. Required. So it means that it's not optional. Don't start reading it yet. We're going to take it piece by piece and practice with it. So before you read anything, before you get into the midst of any reading that you do, it's really important for you to follow the first step. Joseph. And the first step is looking at the title. Now, the title typically gives us an idea of what the topic is going to be, what the topic of the piece is going to be about. So the title of this piece is The Human Journey, Migration Routes. How do I know that's the title? It's in quotation marks. So titles are often in quotation marks if they are titles to smaller works. Sometimes they are italicized if they come from something bigger. And it's at the very top of the page. So those give you some hints that this is the title of the piece. So if this is the title, what do you think that topic is going to be?
Migration.
Okay, so migration is one of those words that we probably don't say every day. I don't know about you guys, but I don't say, hey, kids want to migrate this way. I don't do that.
Right.
So when we're talking about terms and we're talking about things that we want to clarify, it's important that we make it into a language that we would use. So when we're talking about migration routes, what does the migration mean? Movement. Move or movement. Good. Okay? So we've got something about movement. What else? What else is important to know about this topic? Or what can we get out of this topic based on the title?
About history or some people from other side.
Okay, you said people. Where did you get that?
Like group people, like
How do you know it's about people?
because they like migration means like not one person.
Mm-hmm.
Or like migration, I mean maybe you're thinking about like one area people or like more people.
Okay, so when we think of migration, do only humans migrate? Do only people migrate? No. Who else migrates?
Animals.
Animals do. So how do we know that it's people?
It says
Because
human.
that's human.
Yeah. So people, and you think they're moving from one place to the other? Okay, so that's that movement. How do you know that it's from one place to another? Journey, not just the band. Okay, so we're talking about some adventure of some sort. Now, what are routes? What's that?
Where you
Point
take.
or you
The path. Good. So it's the path that people take. And there may be, when we think of a journey, we typically think of some kind of adventure. We think of something that goes on. If we're just talking about migration routes, that's like when the birds go south for the winter. Okay, that's boring. But when we say the human journey, that sounds a bit more exciting. So this part of it means that there's something that happened. There's something that happened that we need to know about. This part of it is just saying that we're talking about the paths that humans take to get from one place to another. Okay? That makes sense. So those are our perceptions. This is what we do before we read. We look at that to see what our perceptions of the piece are. It's really important that we look at that and we understand, what do I know about this topic? So what do you know about people going from one place to another? Boba said history. Why did you say history? What?
If something changes.
Okay, so this is something that's happened a lot in history. People have changed. They've gone from one place to another. So there's probably some historical context to this because this is something that's probably happened over and over again. We know that because history's changed, and we've seen history and how people move from one place to another. Have any of you had experiences moving from one place to another? Okay, most of us have. So we know a little bit about this idea of a journey. So this idea that you go from one place to another, and there's a path that you take along the way. Why do you think it's so important to look at the title and really dive into the title like this? because I want to waste your time. Not because I want to waste your time.
Because it'll let us know what we're reading.
Okay? It gives you a stronger understanding of what it is that you're reading. It's important to know a little bit about the topic as much as possible. It's also important to access what you already know about that topic in order to really help you get comfortable with it. So this is a really short title. This is my master's thesis. So, wrote it. So the title of my piece was Mastering the Balance When Tradition Meets Multi-Genre. So people who read that title, they were going, I know what tradition means and balance. That's about it. So most of the people who were looking at this had no clue what it was. But the people who were in the education area, they were like, oh my gosh, this sounds really interesting. I'm going to read this whole thing. And they did. Because this is a title that is for a specific group of people, for them to understand. This is not something that maybe a kindergartner is going to understand. This is something that those of us who are a little older and maybe who have experience with this or know what these things are, we're going to understand it a bit more. So it's important for us to access what we already know about the title or about the topic based on the title. Now, do titles always have the topic in them? They don't. So this is one tool in figuring out what the piece is about. Okay, so this is the first step. The second step in this is looking at the author. It's important to look at the author to see what you know about that author. If we look at this piece, it's from National Geographic. So what do you guys know about National Geographic?
They're well known
For what?
for animals migrating.
Okay.
Or, yeah.
Yep. So National Geographic, number one, they're very well known. It's a name that most of us are pretty familiar with. We also know that National Geographic has a lot to do with animals and the things that are going on in an animal's life. Anything else? What else do you know about National
It's
Geographic?
the interaction between the humans sometimes and the animals.
Okay, so a lot of the shows that we watch on the National Geographic channel, because they do have a channel, a lot of what we watch is the interaction between the people and the animals. So there's an interaction, an interactive element in that. What about the magazines? What do you know about the National Geographic magazines? That's the magazine in the doctor's office everybody skips over.
No, they're yellow.
There's yellow border around them, yep. That's pretty much
They
what I
usually have animals.
There are a lot of animals.
Or people.
What kind of people?
Like native tribes.
Okay. So National Geographic is known as this cultural piece. So a lot of the shows and a lot of the information in the magazines for National Geographic have to do with understanding cultures. If you didn't know that, does it matter?
Yeah.
It may matter if you know it. It may help you understand what this piece is going to be about even more. But if you didn't know that, it's okay. It's okay if you don't know that about National Geographic. Because when you dive into the reading, you have a blank slate. If I were to tell you guys, hey guys, we're going to read a piece by Shakespeare. Okay, Tina's reaction is the most of what I get. When I say Shakespeare, people go, ugh. Because their experiences with Shakespeare are that it's hard to understand, and they don't like it. And they're long.
That's
So-
nice. A lovely score.
Okay, so a lot of people, and Kyle and Boba now, you're making that connection. So you may think of Shakespeare in a positive way. So your impressions of that author make a big difference. So this is the important part of knowing a little bit about the author. It can help you make connections to what already exists. So I told you we're going to read Shakespeare. We're not really. What if I said we're going to read John Donne?
It's overrated.
Okay. John Donne.
Oh,
Okay, why would you read it?
because it's a good book and I've read it before.
John Donne? He's an author.
Yeah.
We're going to
he
read
writes
something.
novels.
He doesn't write books. He wrote
That's what
poems.
he did.
So most of you are kind of blank slate. You're going, I don't know anything. John Donne is actually very similar to Shakespeare in his writing. Many people think Shakespeare stole some of his work from John Donne. But you don't know that because you have a blank slate. So sometimes it's okay and it's better to have a blank slate, but sometimes when we know a little bit about the author of the piece, it helps us understand a little bit more and maybe trust in that person, or it turns us away. Is there a difference between one author and 12 authors?
Well, yeah.
Okay. What's the difference?
With one author, it's about only what they're writing, where if it's 12 authors, there's more than one person writing in that same predicament
Good.
area.
So if you have one author, you
one
get that one
opinion
person's
versus-
opinion versus the 12 people. If we all have to come together and agree on something to publish it in a book, yeah, that's going to take a lot of work. And we are all going to have maybe factual information instead of opinion-based information.
Yeah.
So there is a difference. How many of you like Nicholas Sparks?
Never.
The Notebook guy and all the Savvy movies?
I like the Notebook.
Okay. So some of you may say, okay, yeah, I like him. Some of you may not know who he is. He is a male author, but he tends to write about very female-driven components, female-driven pieces. Knowing that about him, many women want to read his books because they know it's going to be full of love and romance and things that most of us dream of. So it's full of all of that. So they are attracted to that type of author. The more that you know about authors, the more that you can start making some of those connections. But if you don't have those connections, it's okay. So where you guys have National Geographic, that is the author of the piece. We know that because it's underneath the title. Most of the time, the author's information will be underneath the title. So the next thing is previewing the entire piece. So in this step, we look at the first word or line in a sentence, and then we look at any subheadings. Subheadings are usually centered or they're on the left, but they're usually a section and a few words. Bolded words, italicized words, pictures, charts, and graphs. So let's do this a little bit at a time. So the first thing that is said in this passage is our species is an African one. Now there's more to that sentence, but we won't get to that yet. So if we read that, and our perceptions about this piece were already that this is about the human adventures that people take and the path that they take to get there from one place to another. And we have our species is an African one. What do you think this piece is going to be about?
Humans.
Okay, humans doing what? I'm sorry. I didn't hear you, Kyle.
So trying to survive water.
Okay. So maybe there's some survival in there. And why do you think survival? Do we typically think of Africa as this really like place people go to vacation? No, we don't. We typically think of people who are poor. They do not have the best quality of life compared to ours specifically.
We're just going on a wild adventure.
Okay. So we don't necessarily think of this as a luxury place. So this is some place that we would think about the idea of survival. Good. So the next part of this is looking at any subheadings. This piece does not have any subheadings, so we don't have to worry about that. We just skip over that part. And then we look at bolded words. So the bolded word here, the first one we come across is Homo sapien. So because it is bolded, we do not need to accentuate this in any way. And we're going to talk more about that here in just a minute. The Homo sapiens means modern people. How do I know that?
Because it says in,
It says it in parentheses.
yeah.
Homo
So-
sapiens, this is a Latin word.
It's
Different
what?
language. Homo sapiens.
Mm-hmm.
This is Latin word.
Yes, it's a Latin word. Yes. So if you know it, that's a word that I grew up with. It's just a word that was in my dictionary, my mental dictionary, for a long time. If you don't know it, it's in parentheses right after that. So you see Homo sapiens, you see paleontological in the next paragraph, which means the study of bones. You see the word intrepid, which means brave. You see foray, which means journey. And then there aren't any others on the back side.
That's what I looked at.
So these words like paleontological, intrepid, foray, Homo sapiens, what do those words tell you that this piece is probably going to be about? About what? Okay, it's going to have a lot of vocabulary in it. And this is what I want you guys to know about bolded words. Bolded words are typically vocabulary words. When you come across a word in a passage and it's bolded, it's kind of like the author is punching you in the face saying, pay attention. That's why it's emphasized, it's heavy. So they are emphasizing vocabulary words. Homo sapiens, paleontological, those are not words that we necessarily use. We say people, we don't say Homo sapiens. Unless you're my brother when he was in this weird phase in 5th grade. He said stuff like that. Paleontological, we don't say that very often, if ever. Foray, intrepid, those are not words that we say on a regular basis. So this piece is probably going to be a little bit difficult. Based on the vocabulary words, it's probably going to be difficult. What is this piece going to be about? Based on the vocabulary words, based on the title, the author, what we've already seen. Okay, there's probably some bones in there. What do you mean by bones?
Fossil.
Fossils, okay? So oftentimes we associate bones and the study of bones with fossils. Okay, good. What else?
Maybe, I don't know, a story about how is today being Homo sapiens. How is the relation between 400 years ago, like basically how is developed Homo sapiens?
Okay, so how people have developed since when? Do we know when?
1 million years ago.
Okay, a really, really, really long time ago. We don't know exactly when, but we get the idea that it was a really long time ago. Ricky, what'd you say?
I said it's like people moving from Africa.
Okay, so maybe there's some movement from Africa, and how did you get that?
It says migration.
Okay, migration, and the first thing that we run across is African one, or species is an African one. Good. So we also see a picture. Your picture is horrible. I'm sorry for that. This is what the picture actually looks like. So in this picture, we see green areas, and then we see an area circled and an arrow going to that. Well, I have an arrow going to that. So what do you think that is?
People coming from this area.
Okay, it's that migration route. Somebody's coming from one side to the other. That's probably what's going on. We don't know this for sure. We haven't read the piece, so we don't know this for sure. But these are things that we can start to say, okay, I feel pretty good that this is what it's going to be about. So this is all we do before we actually start reading a piece. Why are we doing all of this work before we even start reading it?
So that we know what we're going to be reading about.
Okay? When you come across readings that are going to be more difficult or you have to do more with it, it's really important that we do this work so we know a little bit more about what it is, or we at least go into it thinking one thing, having a perception, and being aware of that perception. When you go into things like the ECA has large readings and then you have to answer questions. There are 3 large readings and then you answer questions. Your entire grade is based on those 3 readings. So you should probably take a bit of time on those readings. And the more that you activate these reading strategies, the easier it's going to be for you to understand the information. How many of you, and you can be honest about this, how many of you go to the questions first? Yeah. all my former students.
Oh, now wait a minute. In my defense, here, I read the first paragraph. Then I go to the questions and read the question.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I get back to the piece again, then I can pick out the information.
So the problem with what you guys are doing is that you're not getting the critical thinking element of the piece. So reading the element, you can read a book and you can think, oh, that was a good book, and not remember anything that you read. That happens. I read a lot of stuff and I go, what did I just read?
Yep.
It's because you're not absorbing the information. These strategies, you're not engaging. Good. You're not engaging your brain to fire off the neurons and understand this information. So when we understand something or when we connect to something, our brain does, and I don't like science, but I'm going to tell you this. Our brain does this thing where we start to fire off neurons. So our neurons start going and we get excited. It's the reason that when we see somebody we're attracted to, our brain starts going, ooh, that person's hot. I like that person. I want to look at that person even more. It's because we are connecting to that person. It's the same thing that we're doing. We're forcing ourselves to make some connections to this passage when we go through these strategies. We're forcing those connections that may not exist. When you're excited to read something or you know a lot about it, you usually read it and you don't have any problem. But when you're not necessarily engaged in it or you're not interested in it, it's a lot harder to make those connections. How many of you really care about woolly mammoths?
I really didn't care.
Okay, most of you don't. So that piece was a little bit more difficult because you're like, I don't really care. This is that cartoon movie that I watched. What was that?
Ice Age.
Ice Age. Like, that's all I know about it. That's all I care about. So you may not necessarily have had those connections. This is making those connections happen. So before we read, we engage in what we know about the topic. And then, during our reading, we have to actively read. So this is where most students actually make a lot of mistakes. So the first part of this is a lot of students will start at the beginning word and not stop until you get to the last word. So they would start with the word our species and then go to asked and answered. And they would not have a clue what they read. However, your first step is to chunk the information. So in chunking the information, you need to read a paragraph at a time. So authors have given us paragraphs that we read the passage in, and we do stuff with that paragraph before we move on to the next one. Yes?
So it's a paragraph where like it separates from another one like these?
Yes, exactly. So where there's a space in between on this, that is a paragraph change. Normally, and when you guys start writing essays, you will have an indent, and that signifies, hey, the next paragraph is coming. Okay, so whether it's a line or whether it's an indent, that shows another paragraph is coming. So I want you to think of when you're taking in information, think of it like when you're eating, because I refer to everything as food. So when you're eating a steak, you don't just pick up the 6 ounce and just shove it in your mouth and start chewing. That's not the way it works. So you have to cut it up and then take a piece at a time. Sometimes you can take in a bigger piece. Sometimes you may have to cut it down a little bit and make it smaller. So if your paragraph is really long, like the second paragraph on the back side is a really long paragraph. It's longer than the others, and it has a lot of difficult information. So maybe you divide that paragraph up. There are going to be times that you guys read paragraphs that are a whole page. That's an instance where you may need to break that paragraph up. So as we read one chunk at a time, one paragraph at a time. But we can't just do that. The next step is taking notes. So right now, what I want you guys to focus on is identifying words that are the same or similar. So I'm going to read this first. I'm going to attempt to read this first paragraph. Our species is an African one. Africa is where we first evolved and where we have spent the majority of our time on Earth. So the first time you come across a word, okay, But the second time you see it, that's when you need to indicate, hey, this is something important. So every time you see Africa, I would circle that. So in that first paragraph, every time you see Africa,
African.
Africa or African, every time you see that, I want you to circle it. So we also are talking about people. We're talking about us. So species, we, our, that's all talking about humans. So every time you see something that deals with people, I want you to underline it. Why do you think I'm underlining people and circling Africa?
Good.
Bad problem.
Africa is a place,
Mm-hmm.
or also known as a noun,
Okay.
where people is a verb.
Okay, people is a noun too.
Or is it? Okay.
People and Africa are obviously two key ideas. How do I know they're key ideas?
They're repeated.
Good, they're repeated. Things that are repeated are going to be important. So in this case, Africa is repeated a few times, and species or people is repeated as well. I want to distinguish between those two key points. So let me go on and I'll show you why this is so important. The earliest fossils of recognizably modern Homo sapiens, or modern people, appear in the fossil record in Ethiopia, Africa, around 200,000 years ago. So I can continue by underlining Homo sapiens, or people, because all of those things are about people. So here's what I'm going to do with that. People. I'm going to write that over to the side. Now, Africa. I've got our species is an African one. Africa is where we first evolved. And then we've got Ethiopia, Africa. So I'm going to put that over on the side. Now, why did I put a star above fossil? Okay? It's something that is what? Okay, it's significant because it's repeated. So this whole paragraph is about people, people's fossils come from Africa. That's the main idea of that passage. So the best way to do this is to go through, as you're reading, identify the things that are similar, that are repeated more than once. In addition to that, once you have finished with that paragraph, you need to write the main idea off to the side. Do I need to write that it happened around 200,000 years ago?
No,
No, why not?
it's not, trying to think of the word.
It's not relevant.
That word.
Okay. It may be, we may have a question like, how long ago did we find fossils?
Then you would circle or star or box, whatever, if you came across that.
Okay. If I came across that question, here's what my eyes are going to do. They're going to go, oh, well, we talked about where we came from in that first paragraph. Oh, there's a number. The number is distinguished from the words. So I don't highlight numbers. I don't highlight bolded words because those things already stand out as different. So you don't need to circle this because your eyes are going to go, oh, there's a number right there. I better look at that. And you can go back and you can reread this when you're answering the question. So numbers, I don't typically stand those out. I don't circle those or underline those because they already stand out as different from the text. Same thing with bolded words. Why did I underline this bolded word?
I'm gonna say again.
Because it means people.
Right.
Seems different definitions per word.
Yeah, it's a synonym for the word people. So I have that as one of my key words. So for me, that is an important note. That is a key note. So what I'm going to have you guys do is practice with the second paragraph. So as you read the second paragraph, I want you guys to circle anytime you see anything about Africa, underline anytime you see anything about people, put a star above anything about fossils. If you find any other patterns, you could put a box around those.
Now, what was that?
If you find anything different in the second paragraph, you can put a box around it. Identify it and distinguish it. And then I want you guys to write your note off to the side. About the main idea.
Not understanding how to come up with the main idea.
Okay, so that's where you're going to take the main words that you have highlighted. You're going to make a list of those and then put it into, like, add a verb. Basically. You have a verb here. So what are the key things that you got out of this? Mm-hmm.
Population, so it was,
Mm-hmm. So what happened in that population?
it dropped,
Because of,
climate shift and change.
so the African population dropped because of culture. Yeah, that's it.
it's warm in here, the next minute it's cold.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday it was cold.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so some of the keywords that you likely circled, we had, of course, Africa. It was mentioned in there a couple times. We have people. So people, we, our. Why did I underline ancestors and population?
Because it's got a lot of people.
Okay, ancestors are our people, and population is the population of people. So I underlined those words because those are synonyms. Good. Now I boxed climatic shifts, climate, ice age, and cold. Why do you think I put a box around those?
Talk about the weather.
Okay, one of the focuses in this passage is about the weather. And what does the weather do?
It changes.
Okay, and that change results in?
A drop in population.
Okay, so if we were to take all these words, we can put this into a main idea sentence. So we could, and what you have is probably fine. You'll double check it once I write this down. So the population decreased. Okay, this is my main idea. The population, that has people, decreased. That's a word I use. If you say got smaller, that's okay. In Africa, that's the key component, due to climate shifts. So that brings in the weather and the shifts in that. Is that fairly accurate for that paragraph? Right. So this is a process that you go through as you're reading in order to help you understand what the piece is about. For some of you, you may be going, okay, this is a paragraph at a time. This is going to take me forever. Sometimes it does. It just depends on the intensity and the difficulty of what you're reading. The next paragraph gets a little bit more difficult. So as you go through this process, it's going to be a little bit harder. Which is why this is a benefit. Because as it gets harder and more difficult, you can make it easier on yourself by identifying those patterns. Those patterns are what make up the main idea. So the last thing I'm going to show you guys is what we do, a couple of things about the note-taking and what we're looking for. And then I'm going to show you guys what we do after. So again, we're looking for main idea, keywords, things that are repeated. We are also looking at unfamiliar vocabulary. Now, right now, if you come across vocabulary that you don't know, it is probably somewhere in a sentence. We are going to work tomorrow on understanding vocabulary a bit more and using the sentence itself to figure out the meaning. If you don't know a vocabulary word, my suggestion is to write it on the opposite side of your main idea. So over here, we have our main idea from this passage. Let's say that we didn't know the word. Is there a word in there?
Ancestry.
Okay. So ancestors.
I knew what that word was.
So if you don't know a word, your best bet is to try to figure it out. If you still don't know it, I would suggest that you write your questions over here on the opposite side. So this is my main idea. This is what I already know. These are questions that I have based on what I just read.
Are you gonna take it back to the page prior to this,
Um,
where it had the,
this one?
Yeah.
Yep.
okay.
So again, we're looking for main ideas. We're looking for keywords. We're going to go over this stuff later. We don't have time today to deal with it, but we'll talk about it later on. So you're looking for those main ideas, those keywords, things that are repeated. Those are the things that you're circling, underlining, highlighting. You're also looking for unfamiliar vocabulary. You want to try to figure out the meaning based on the sentence. If you can't, then I would suggest that you just make a list of it. Why do you think I'm not going to suggest that you stop and look up those words?
Because it's gonna wear you out.
Okay, it's going to decrease your comprehension if you take yourself out of the situation. Think of it as this is an endurance. You're building up your endurance for understanding the material. And it's like when you exercise, if you take yourself out of that situation, it's really, really hard to get back on that treadmill. It's really hard to get back into.
So I took away from the diagnostic by writing down the words that I didn't know.
Yep. It decreases your comprehension when you take yourself out of the situation. So that's why I always suggest before you're getting ready to take a test that you go to the bathroom, you get your drink, you're all set up. That way you don't have to remove yourself from that environment. One of the things I'm doing right now, because I shared with you guys that I'm starting my doctoral program next week, we have to do a test, an exam, basically, that identifies that we have a space that we can not have to remove ourselves from. So we have a quiet environment to study in because that is the best method for understanding and keeping your comprehension up. I put off the test for days because there was a reading comprehension section. And I have to take a little bit of time and get away from my kids. So I knew that there was no way that I could go home and do that. I had to wait until everybody was gone from this building. And then I hid in my office, and I did the test then. And it was only 10 minutes, which really frustrated me because I probably could have found 10 minutes, but they made it seem like it was going to be long. That is the importance of keeping yourself involved in the material. That's why we are going to be practicing later on with tests, the timing. Because, the timing of parties. Because later on, when you do the ECA, you're going to have a specific time frame. And you really need to get through and pace yourselves in order to help your endurance and your understanding of the material. So we're looking at unfamiliar vocabulary, but we're also developing questions that we may have based on the passage. Again, keep those things separate and keep them on the paper. The other part of this is what we call annotating, taking notes in the margins. So annotating is taking notes in the margins. Annotating is the most beneficial way for you guys to understand and comprehend the information. If you are taking notes on a separate piece of paper from what you're reading, then you're navigating between two pieces. And you're going to decrease your comprehension going from one to the other.
Now,
It's what happens to pretty much everything.
say annotations again.
Annotations are notes in the margins. So the last part of this during your reading is that you guys are looking for those ideas that are repeated to identify the main idea and then those supporting details. That's what we've been writing over here on the side. I'm not going to erase that just yet. So to identify the main idea, and one of the questions on the woolly mammoth piece was, what is the main idea of this passage? If you guys had taken some notes, it probably would have been really easy for you to figure out which one was right. Pretty easy to do. So we're looking for the main idea, and again, we're looking at the supporting details. The thing about annotating is that you make physical and kinesthetic connections based on what you see. So let me explain that. So you are physically writing on it, so you know in your mind's eye where it is. So remember we were talking about how long ago we found the fossils? What paragraph is that in?
The first paragraph.
Good. You can easily start to recollect those things the more that you make some attachments you're physically writing on the paper. Where's that map? Okay, it's on the top right side. Good. You're going to start to physically make those connections. We don't have too much left to go on. So it's important that you guys start to build this through your annotations, through your note taking, in order to identify the main idea and supporting details. But we're not done. So the last part of this is the think, write, discuss. So when we're doing this is the stuff we do after we get done with a passage. So the first part of this is thinking about what you learned. It's important to think about what you learned from the passage rather than what you already knew. Why is it more important to think about what you learned versus what you knew?
Because this is main idea. This is what we know. Later we had a question about it.
Okay. How many of you ever seen that SpongeBob episode where he is trying to be a waiter and Squidward is like, take everything out of your brain, take everything out of your filing cabinet. Our brains are kind of like filing cabinets. We have stuff in the brain, and the more that we know, the deeper in the filing cabinet system it is. So if you know something, it's in there. So you don't have to think about what you already knew. How many of you already knew that our species came from Africa? Okay. So that's not something that you need to write. That's already in your filing system. That's already in your brain. But if you didn't know that, that would be important to think about. The other part of this is writing a summary of the entire passage. So at the very end of your passage, I suggest that you guys write a summary. A couple of notes about summaries. First of all, a summary does not have your opinion at all. So a summary is just going to be what was actually in the passage. You also want to have key details. Now these are key ideas. These are not specific details. So again, I don't need to write that this happened 200,000 years ago. I don't need that. I need to write that the population decreased in Africa due to the climatic shifts or the climate shifts. So a really great cheat on this is to take your paragraph summaries that is your main idea and key details. So if I take, what was the first paragraph? What was our summary of the first paragraph?
Fossils come from Africa.
Okay, so in our first paragraph, we said that the fossils come from Africa, or show that people come from Africa, and then we say the population decreased in Africa due to the climate shifts. And then we take our third paragraph, and our fourth paragraph, and our fifth paragraph, and our final paragraph, and we just put those sentences, those summaries that we did, we just put those together, and that's a summary of the whole passage.
So, paragraph summarizes.
Summaries.
Okay, summary.
So basically, you take all the stuff that you have written on that left-hand side, and you just list those sentences. That's the main idea of the whole piece. Why is it so important to write a summary after you've read something?
So you know that you understood what you read.
Good. That's going to help you understand what you read. So it's kind of like reassuring yourself, hey, I know what I'm talking about. I understand this information. What happens if you don't understand it?
Then you're lost when it comes to reading.
Okay? You can go back, if you've been chunking, you can go back to the paragraph that was most unclear, and you can reread that paragraph instead of rereading the entire thing.
Right.
And most of the time it's going to be a paragraph or two that throws you off rather than the whole piece. The other part of this is we forget things. Am I the only one?
No.
Okay,
No.
I forget things immediately after they happen. I go into the kitchen and what am I in here for? It's so frustrating. So if you write something about it right after it, then it's going to help you remember the information even better. The last part of this is discussing the piece. So in discussing the piece, it is important to discuss it with others who have read it and those who have not read it. So let's take those piece by piece. Why is it important for us to discuss with others who have read it?
Did you get their opinion
Okay, maybe they have different opinions
or ideas?
or ideas or perceptions on what it is that you read. So they may pull out things that they think are significant that you didn't even think of. They may also have connections to things that you didn't know existed. So remember yesterday when we were dealing with those tweets? And half of you were like, I don't know what's going on, I don't understand. If you didn't know what was going on with Steve Harvey's world, you didn't get it. So the more that you talk to people, the more that you're going to be able to make those connections. Why do you think you would talk to people who have not read the piece?
So that they could understand what you read.
Okay? This is you basically, if you're talking to someone who's not read it, it's like you're teaching the other person. When we teach others, that helps us learn and understand the information better. So I have always been pretty good at writing. Grammar, not so much, until I started teaching it. And then I was teaching it at Taylor Middle School, and I got it because it was really easy because I had to know it in order to teach them. So I was learning the rules in a different mindset, and when you're teaching something, you learn the rules in a different mindset. It's kind of like, how many of you are parents? A lot of you guys. So when you're teaching your kids, it's different from when you learned it yourself. And you understand the information even better. Okay? Yes, the experience comes in. Good. So I want you guys to kind of think of this. Oh, hey, I got this too. Let me talk through each of these steps. So the things that you learn. There's a passage or a section of that that talks about there's a secret bridge that goes underneath the water. And that is how people migrated. I didn't know that. It's in there. It's really interesting. I didn't know that. That's actually the circle from the two continents. That's what that piece is about. That's about the only thing in this passage that I didn't know. So I didn't learn a lot from this passage. But my summary just includes all of those main ideas of each of those pieces. So I want you to think of this process. Again, I like to compare the process to everything. So it's kind of like when you're going to the movies. Before, it's like, hey, I want to figure out what I want to see. What movie do I want to see? So you're looking at different titles. You may be looking at the actors who are in the movies. You may be looking at the posters. You may be looking at graphic pieces. You're figuring out what you want to see. So my husband and I, we were going to the movies on Christmas, and we are both big fighting fans. So we said, forget Star Wars, even though I'm a Trekkie, and I love Star Wars too. I love anything that involves space. Yes, I love that stuff. But my husband, not so much. So we had to decide what we were going to see. We both love fighting, So we automatically said, oh, okay, Creed is out. It is a really good movie. So while we were there, it's kind of like when you're going to the movie. You have to get settled into your seat. We got there very early because we knew that the line of Star Wars fans was going to be huge. It was annoying. We also wanted to get the perfect seat. I have to sit in the middle. I don't care if I'm where I am, but as long as I'm in the middle, so I get a really good side-to-side view. That's my preference.
Same here.
And I had to get my popcorn. I had to go to use the bathroom because I don't leave movies. So I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to get out of that environment. And then after we watched the movie, we were so excited about it, we wanted to tell others about it. So you think about, well, hey, this really clears up a lot. We went when Straight Outta Compton came out. I'm an 80s child, so we went to it. And my husband and his best friend, I was like, okay, first of all, no singing. Shut up. Second of all, it cleared up so much stuff. When we were there and we were in the moment, we were like, what happened to this? What happened to this? What happened to Easy? What happened to this? Between the guys. We just didn't know, and it cleared up so much stuff. So after we left, we were like, oh my gosh, you should go see this. You should go see this. You should not go see this because you're stupid. So we were telling people who should go see it, who should not go see it, who would be interested in it. So it's kind of like when you're getting ready to go to a movie. That's the process. You have to be engaged in that process. Otherwise, you're not going to remember it as much. Okay? All right. We only have about a half an hour left. So if you guys want to take a quick, 3-minute break, I know that's not long enough to go out and smoke a cigarette. Or maybe it is if you run. I don't know. But take a quick 2 to 3 minute break. We're going to come back and talk about the writing process. And we're going to go through that probably more quickly. Okay? So just take 3 minutes, come back, and we will refocus. I want you guys to at least get up, move around a little bit. I'm going to open the door. Walk around a little bit. Miss Mayor.
This
It's hot in here.
kid, she had her baby.
She went into yesterday to get induced. She didn't text me, so I don't know how it's going on. But it started snowing and stuff. I don't know.
I was actually one of the annoying